Scary telling. I had always been fascinated with the idea of past lives. The thought of living multiple lives and carrying memories and experiences with you from one life to the next was something that intrigued me. So, when I discovered that my family had the ability to remember their past lives, I was thrilled. It started with my grandmother. She would tell us stories of her previous lives, of the people she had been and the things she had done. As I grew older, I realized that this ability ran in our family. My mother, my aunts, and even my cousins all had memories of their past lives. One day, I decided to tell my son about my past life. I had been a young girl who had been murdered, and I had always wondered who had done it and why. I thought that maybe by sharing this memory with my son, I could gain some sort of closure. But his response caught me off guard. "What are the odds we'd meet again?" he grinned. I was confused. "What do you mean, son?" He just smiled and shook his head. "Never mind, Mom. It's nothing." But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about his response. Was it just a coincidence that we had met in this life, or was there something more to it? As the days passed, I started to notice strange things happening around our house. Objects would move on their own, and I would hear whispers in the middle of the night. I brushed it off as my imagination, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, I woke up to find my son standing at the foot of my bed. He was staring at me with a look of pure hatred in his eyes. I tried to speak, but he just disappeared. The next day, I asked my son about it, but he denied ever being in my room. I didn't believe him, but I didn't push it. I was scared of what I might find out. As time went on, I started to have vivid dreams about my past life. I would see the face of the person who had killed me, and I knew that it was my son. In my dreams, he would whisper things to me, things that no child should ever say to their mother. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself that it was just my imagination running wild. But then I found a journal hidden in my son's room. It was filled with drawings of me being murdered, and it was clear that he was the one behind it all. I confronted him, and he just laughed. "I had to finish what I started," he said. I didn't know what to do. My own son had killed me in a past life and was now seeking revenge. But how could I stop him? He was just a child. That's when I remembered something my grandmother had told me. She had said that in order to break the cycle of reincarnation, you had to confront your past and make amends. Maybe that was what I needed to do. Maybe if I could confront my son and make him understand the gravity of his actions, we could break the cycle. So, I sat my son down and told him everything. I told him about my past life and how his actions had hurt me. And for the first time, I saw remorse in his eyes. We hugged and cried, and I could feel the weight of our past lives lifting off of our shoulders. We had broken the cycle, and we could finally move on. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear whispers in the darkness. I know that our past lives will always be a part of us, and I can only hope that we have truly broken the cycle of reincarnation. I can never forget the horrors that I experienced, but I am grateful that I was able to confront them with my son. Now, I look at him with love and forgiveness, but also with a sense of caution. I know that the memories of our past lives can be both a blessing and a curse, and I am determined to make sure that the cycle of vengeance and pain is broken for good. As for my son, he has shown no signs of remembering his past life since that day. But I can't help but wonder what other memories are lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. and what other horrors might be waiting for us in the next life. I may never know the answers to these questions, but one thing is certain: I will always be vigilant, watching for any signs that the cycle of reincarnation might be beginning again. And I will always be ready to confront my past and make amends, no matter how terrifying the journey may be. I've always loved music. There's nothing like turning up your favorite song and belting out the lyrics at the top of your lungs. It's a form of release, a way to escape from the world around you. But lately, my love of music has taken on a sinister tone. You see, I've been hearing screams coming from the root cellar beneath my house. At first, I tried to ignore them, telling myself that it was just the wind or some kind of animal. But the screams persisted, night after night, growing louder and more desperate. And then one day, as I was singing along to my favorite song, I realized something terrifying. The music was drowning out the screams from the cellar. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that there was no way someone could be screaming from beneath my house. But the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became. And so, I decided to investigate. I made my way down to the cellar, my heart pounding in my chest. The screams were louder now, more agonized than ever. And as I approached the root cellar door, I could feel my hands shaking with fear. I opened the door slowly, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. And then, I saw her. A woman, chained to the wall, her face twisted in pain and terror. And as soon as she saw me, she started screaming again, begging me to help her. I wanted to help her, I really did. But something inside of me held me back. It was like a voice in my head, telling me that it was better to just leave her there, to ignore her screams and go about my life as if nothing was wrong. And so, I did. I closed the cellar door and went back upstairs, turning up my music as loud as it would go. The screams were still there, but they were muted now, distant and almost comforting in their familiarity. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. I went about my life as usual, pretending like nothing was wrong. But the screams never stopped, and I found myself singing louder and louder to drown them out. And then, one day, I woke up to find that my music had stopped. The power was out, and the house was dark. And as I sat there in the silence, I realized something even more horrifying. The screams had stopped too. I made my way down to the cellar, using my phone as a flashlight. And there, in the darkness, I saw her. The woman who had been chained to the wall was now lying on the ground, her body twisted and broken. And then, I heard a voice. It was the same voice that had told me to ignore her screams all those months ago. But now, it was different. It was clearer, louder, more insistent. "You did this," the voice said. "You ignored her cries for help. You let her suffer and die. And now, you'll pay the price." I tried to run, but the door was locked. And then, I felt something grab me. Something cold and slimy, like rotting flesh. And as I screamed, I realized that I was not alone in the cellar. The last thing I saw was my phone screen flashing low battery before the darkness consumed me, and the screaming started all over again. I always thought that staying in a fancy hotel would be the perfect way to spend my summer vacation. But after what I experienced in room 1207, I realized that some things are better left unexplored. It all started with a nightmare. In my dream, I saw a figure with long, rotting nails that pushed through my chest. I woke up in a panic, relieved that it was only a dream, but then I noticed something strange. My alarm clock read 12:06, 1 minute before the time in my nightmare. I tried to shake it off and go back to sleep, but then I heard a creaking noise. It was coming from my closet. At first, I thought it was just the hotel's old building settling in the night. But as the noise grew louder, I knew it was something else. My heart raced as I watched the closet door slowly creak open. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was watch as a figure emerged from the darkness. It was the same figure from my nightmare, with long, rotting nails and a ghostly pallor. I tried to scream, but she clamped her hand over my mouth, muffling any noise. Her eyes were dark and hollow, and she stared at me with a hunger that sent chills down my spine. For what felt like an eternity, she held me there, her hand still covering my mouth. I could feel her icy breath on my face as she leaned in closer. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished into thin air. I sat there, trembling with fear, until the first light of dawn crept into the room. I tried to convince myself that it was just a nightmare, that I had imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew it was real. Over the next few days, I tried to forget about the haunting. I went sightseeing, tried new foods, and even took a dip in the hotel pool. But every time I returned to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And then, one night, she came back. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard the closet door creak open again. I tried to ignore it, but then I felt the same cold, clammy hand on my chest. I knew it was her. This time, I was ready. I pushed her hand away and jumped out of bed. But when I turned on the lights, there was nobody there. I searched the entire room, but there was no sign of the ghostly figure. I thought about calling the front desk and asking for a new room, but something held me back. Maybe it was the thrill of the unknown, or maybe I just didn't want to admit that I was scared.
Whatever the reason, I stayed in room 1207 for the rest of my stay.
And every night, without fail, she came back. Sometimes it was just a faint whisper, other times it was a cold breath on the back of my neck. But she was always there, reminding me of the terror that awaited me in the darkness. When my vacation finally came to an end, I was relieved to leave room 1207 behind. But even now, years later, I can still feel her presence lurking in the shadows. And I know that someday, she'll come back for me, her long, rotting nails poised to strike once more. I never believed in the supernatural until the night I drove down the vanishing highway. It was a foggy night, and I was driving back home after visiting my parents. I had driven down this highway many times before, but this time was different. As I drove down the road, I noticed that the fog was getting thicker, and the red taillights of the cars ahead of me were barely visible. I slowed down, but then I blinked, and all the taillights vanished in the mist. It was as if the cars had disappeared into thin air. I tried to keep my calm and thought that it must be a trick of the light, but as I drove further, I realized that something strange was happening. The fog was getting thicker, and I couldn't see anything beyond a few feet in front of me. I kept driving, hoping to reach a clearing, but there was no end to the fog. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. I tried to remember the exits, but they were all a blur. I had been driving for 2 hours since the taillights vanished, and I hadn't seen a single car or exit ramp. It was as if I was stuck in a never-ending foggy void. I started to panic. I didn't know what to do or where to go. I tried to call for help, but my phone was dead. I was completely alone, lost in the fog. As I drove further, I noticed something strange in the distance. It was a faint light, flickering in the distance. I drove towards it, hoping to find some help or a way out of this foggy nightmare. As I got closer, I realized that the light was coming from an old gas station. It was the only sign of life I had seen in hours, and I felt relieved. I parked my car and went inside the gas station, but what I saw inside made my blood run cold. The gas station was empty, but it was as if someone had just left. The coffee pot was still hot, and the newspapers were scattered on the counter. There were no signs of struggle, but it was clear that something wasn't right. I heard a sound coming from the back of the store. It was a faint whisper, but I couldn't make out what it was saying. I followed the sound, and it led me to a door. I opened it, and what I saw on the other side made my heart stop. The room was empty, but there was a mirror on the wall. I looked into the mirror, and I saw myself, but something was off. My reflection was distorted, and it looked like it was moving on its own. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. It was as if my reflection had a hold on me, and I was trapped. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the mirror, but eventually, I managed to break free and run out of the gas station. I got into my car and drove as fast as I could, hoping to escape the vanishing highway. The fog was still thick, but I could see a faint light in the distance. It was the exit ramp. I took the ramp and drove for miles, but the fog never lifted. It was as if the vanishing highway had followed me, and I was trapped in the mist forever. To this day, I don't know what happened that night, but I know one thing for sure. The vanishing highway is real, and it's out there, waiting to trap anyone who dares to drive down its foggy path. I never imagined that a simple act of kindness would turn my life into a nightmare. It all started when I returned a lost girl to her father at a grocery store. I thought it was a good deed, but the police had a different perspective. One night, I received a knock on my door. It was the police, and they claimed that I was involved in aiding a kidnapping. I was in shock, and my mind raced with confusion. How could I be involved in such a heinous crime when all I did was return a lost girl to her father? The police officer looked at me with suspicion and then showed me the video footage from the grocery store. It showed me handing the girl over to a man who looked like her father, but then the man quickly left the store with the girl without paying for anything. I could see how it looked like I was involved, but I knew that it was all a misunderstanding. I tried to explain my side of the story, but the police were not convinced. They took me into custody, and my life turned into a nightmare. I was stripped of my freedom, and my reputation was tarnished. Days turned into weeks, and I felt like I was in a never-ending nightmare. The more I protested my innocence, the more the police dug into my past. They found out about my previous run-ins with the law, and they used that to paint me as a criminal. As time passed, I felt myself sinking deeper into despair. I was losing hope, and I knew that I needed to do something to prove my innocence. That's when I remembered the man who took the girl from the store. I didn't get a good look at him, but I remembered that he was wearing a red cap. I started to investigate on my own. I went back to the grocery store and asked the employees if they had seen the man with the red cap. They didn't remember anything, but I kept searching. Finally, after days of searching, I found a lead. A gas station attendant remembered seeing a man with a red cap and a little girl in a car. I tracked down the car's license plate, and it led me to a house on the outskirts of town. I went to the house, and it looked like it was abandoned. But then I heard a noise coming from inside. I cautiously entered the house, and I could hear a little girl crying. I followed the sound and found a room with a girl tied up and gagged. I untied her, and she hugged me tightly. She told me that the man with the red cap had taken her from her real father and was planning to sell her. I called the police, and they came to the scene. They arrested the man with the red cap, and I was finally exonerated. I was hailed as a hero for rescuing the little girl. But even with my name cleared, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had been a part of something much darker than I ever thought possible. It was a cautionary tale that showed me that sometimes even the best of intentions can lead to unexpected and terrifying consequences.